everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show, Kyle and I get to dig into some fun stuff. How you doing today, Kyle?
Good, Joe. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Just wanted to, before we dig in, give a shout out to the Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists class, currently selling individual learner packages. If you don't want to wait for when we're teaching this in a live supported fashion, you can jump in whenever you want and take it at whatever pace you'd want. And you can find that at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And we've also got some really cool other courses like the Carl Jung and Psychedelics course, Imagination is Revelation, shadow side of psychedelia. Got that backwards. Yep. and a bunch of other cool stuff, including free classes. So check that out. If you don't want to help us out that way, leave us a review on Facebook, iTunes, podcast app, Google, wherever. It helps a lot. Cool. And I think let's dig in.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, biggest news of the week on Twitter, Alex Gray started following Kyle.
Thanks, Alex Gray. I appreciate it. It was a nice thing to wake up this morning. So if you listen to the show, thank you for your support. I don't post much on Twitter, but thank you.
Yeah. No, I love that stuff. Like when I see somebody I like followed me, it's like heartwarming. So thank you all for supporting us on social media. It's awesome. Next up, Kyle, you've been taking some ketamine-assisted psychotherapy training. Where have you been doing that?
Yeah, over at Polaris Insights Center. So with Veronica Gold, Harvey Schwartz, and Eric. I always forget his last name. Sorry, Eric.
Are they Bay Area folks?
They are. Yep. Yeah, Bay Area. They have been doing ketamine. They have a center there, and then they're also providing some online training. I think they have 5 modules. I did 2 out of the 5 so far. I'm loving it so far. The content's really great. The team's really awesome over there. And I just love kind of like the diversity of information that they're providing within the training. And Harvey's been doing a really great job with just presenting some of the stuff that like I think clinicians and people should know. So really bringing in like, you know, this cross between somatic and transpersonal and also shamanic. And so it definitely resonates with me. And I just kind of love their approach over there because of that. So it feels like very synergistic to the way I operate and think about things. So yeah, I've just been really appreciating what they're doing over there and their training. I'll have, actually, I think next week I'm going to be recording with Veronica and Harvey.
Oh, cool.
So we'll get them on the show. I don't know when that will be released due to our backlog, but, stay tuned.
Absolutely. And perhaps worth noting, as far as I know, they're not paying us, right?
No.
So,
no.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to talk about other folks' training programs when we have our own. But what I think we're trying to get at is that there needs to be a lot more training out there. Mm-hmm. There's not enough training available currently, and we need to train people on tons of stuff. So I think it's just really important that we stay on top of this and keep the movement rolling, supporting each other, a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think just being able to learn from a lot of different people, there's stuff that, they brought up in their training. I'm like, oh yeah, duh, and it's just, it's kind of nice to hear other people try to formulate ideas around psychedelic experiences and their work. So yeah, just super helpful to have the diversity and just learning from others. Yeah, like I said, the somatic and transpersonal and shamanic approaches that they seem to incorporate, it's like, yeah, it's right on par with how I operate. So
yeah, it's fantastic. And yeah, I just hope to be able to be allowed into some of this training, as I'm not a clinician with no clinical training, but been around this stuff for a long time. So it would be good to just be able to jump in. So if anybody wants to make exceptions for me, feel free to send me an invite. Yeah, and you can learn more at polarisinsightcenter.org or something.
Might be .com.
Yeah, whatever. Google works.
Yeah, Polaris Insights Center.
Yeah. Cool.
And if you want to learn a little bit more about Veronica, you can go back into our archive. I did an interview with her maybe last year or so, and we talk about ketamine and kind of somatics and stuff like that. So if you want to learn more about her, go back into our archive, Veronica Gold.
Yeah, totally. So really quick paranoid interjection. So recently, Apple came out with an update that a number of the big tech companies were complaining about being too secure. I don't know if you've heard this one yet. There is a logo that pops up in the top a little symbol that pops up when an app is accessing the microphone without you knowing. Because we've all been seeing this, right? You talk about Applebee's for your first time in 15 years, and all of a sudden Applebee's starts showing up on your phone.
Right.
So like that's a pretty well-known thing at this point. I think it's becoming apparent in things like Social Dilemma. And yeah, just for what it's worth, there are things that are more secure than others. Apple, thankfully, is kind of veering more towards privacy. Google's kind of going in the other direction. For now, we'll see how that shifts. You know, that weird thing where there was a deadly shootout or possible terrorist, right?
Yep.
Apple refused to unlock the phone and break the encryption, I believe, for a long time, under incredible federal pressure to do so, and they didn't do it, which is a good precedent for us in the psychedelic world, right? Because if they released all the encryption codes, like, it'd be a lot easier to spy on us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, you know, for what it's worth, that's a thing out there. Something came up recently around like Telegram versus Signal. I don't know if you've been seeing this kind of craziness lately.
In the past, but nothing too recent.
So a lot of people still don't like Signal. A lot of people really like Telegram. Telegram is a privately owned Russian corporation with like a bounty out for anybody that can crack their software, right?
Huh.
So that's interesting, but it's privately held and not open source. By it not being open source, there's no promise that your data is private. Anybody at that company could access your info, and then there's no reason why somebody couldn't hack the back end and access it also. So just for what it's worth there, and open source just being like everybody has the ability to look at the code. So you've got hundreds of programmers from around the world analyzing this stuff regularly to make sure it's private. Some people are looking for holes, but other people are looking to patch those up. So by there being code reviewed regularly, you're in great shape. The limitation...
What's the argument with Signal?
Signal is open source. So we don't have a private corporation keeping secrets. We've got no secrets whatsoever on how it works. We totally know how it works. The issue with it is that people try to make like arguments like, oh, it's so unsecure. It's like the platform itself is what's the issue. Like part of the, I forget if it was the Snowden or Assange leaks talked about at a certain point, the intelligence agencies having access to see your screen. So they can actually see what's going on here and probably access your audio too. So that is the issue. It's not the application, it's the platform.
Gotcha.
And the same platform hosts Telegram. So like, you know, for what it's worth, like open source versus private, but you're still running on something that's insecure. So, you know, I guess pigeons, messenger pigeons are the most untraceable thing at this point. I learned that over the weekend in John Wick 3. So there you have it. Just it's the paranoid update for the week. And, you know, for what it's worth, perhaps rotate through applications. I think open source is always better, but it depends on how paranoid you need to be.
Right.
I err towards not going to jail and taking less risks. Other people are kind of okay taking those risks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a couple of weeks ago when Social Dilemma came out, everybody was posting about it. So I think it is, you know, a pretty relevant topic to discuss, especially kind of being in this field and just thinking about cybersecurity and everything like that. So yeah, thanks for that update.
Absolutely.
And I know like a lot of that stuff from Social Dilemma felt really new. I guess since I've been kind of following it for a while, some of it's like, oh yeah, well, knowing this has been going on for quite a while, but I still
haven't watched it yet.
You should. It's interesting.
Yeah. Like being a paranoid, I assume I know most of it, but let's see what happens after I watch it. Yeah. The statistical stuff is unbelievable. And these like bot farms and just how to manipulate an election being almost down to a science now. Yeah. It's unreal. So yeah, let's move on to the next topic, which is this religious scholar started getting a lot of press recently about his thesis. Did hallucinogens play a role in the origin of religion? Name is Brian Muraresku. You watched this video? I didn't get a chance to dig in yet. What you learn?
Yeah, I watched it a few days ago. CNN featured Brian, and I know Brian and Graham Hancock were also on Joe Rogan, which I didn't get a chance to listen to it, but you know, multiple people kind of told me to check it out, and it was a really awesome interview. But it was just really interesting to see this thesis being presented on CNN, and really just talking about ancient Greek culture and, did the Greeks use, drugs to find God, essentially. So Brian wrote this book called The Immortality Key, The Secret History of Religion with No Name. So yeah, I mean, I think the thing that really stuck out to me was like, oh wow, they're kind of pitching this narrative on CNN. Could that really kind of change the way most people look at religion if psychedelics were incorporated into these rites? I think studying philosophy and what Lenny kind of has passed down to us within like that dream shadow lineage, thinking about the Eleusinian Mysteries, Dionysian rites, and all that type of stuff, like, to us, maybe it just like, oh yeah, like this has been around. This has been a theory for many years. Who was that? Carl Rook, Albert Hoffman, and
Allegro.
The Road to Eleusis.
Road to Eleusis.
I always, yeah, wrote that book, kind of hypothesizing ergot being the potential catalyst there in the brews that were drunk during those rites of passages.
Wasson, Hoffman, and Ruck. Gordon Wasson.
Yes,
yeah.
Wasson. And then I think Robert Forte was involved in publishing that as well.
Yeah, edited. He's got the credit in the bottom left there.
Nice.
Good for him. That's a cool credit. Right. So like we've got kind of a ton of people talking about this, right? Like this book was published in what the hell? The 50s? No, that doesn't make sense. So this book has been out for ages, right? And there's oodles of other books kind of discussing this. Even somebody like Marciliade talking about either the kind of non-drug and then the drug-oriented groups. Like he's been writing about that for a long time. So like there's long-standing traditions, and we've got even anthropological evidence, archaeological evidence showing that drugs had been used for a long time. And people are now even speculating that Moses was huffing like smoked acacia or something, or like some sort of ayahuasca analog type thing that would have been available in the Middle East. So it's an interesting thing, not to mention soma in the Hindu scriptures.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. I think like a ton of the Rig Veda is made up of references to soma. Kind of shocking. So I'm glad somebody is really taking this fight to the public. I'm glad it got on CNN. That's really cool. And I'm glad people are just, curious. Like, you didn't read Rick Strassman yet, right? The DMT and the Soul of Prophecy?
Not yet, no.
It's interesting because it's trying to reframe a little bit like how to deal with these revelations. Like, when are these messages from God? And when do we follow them? It's kind of like, that's how I kind of read it. Like,
right.
And to me, that's like a little crazy. It's like, all right, cool. Like, sure, go. Like, you got a message from God that you're going to go do something. Hopefully it's good. Like, that can go really badly, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But, we made it this far in human history, and perhaps that was how it was played, quite often.
Right.
Like, even in the Greek mythology, like this kind of stuff looks like it's directly messages from gods. So perhaps that's what was happening when they were partaking in mysteries.
Yeah.
It actually seemed like
it's
that.
Interesting that like the Eleusinian Mysteries, went on for about like 2,000 years, right? And it was, what happened in there was pretty much kept a secret. But you had initiates like Plato and, a lot of those Greek philosophers. But, there is, I guess, some, writing about it. Like the poet Pindar spoke about the Eleusinian Mysteries as dying before dying. And, it's interesting that it went on for so long, because I guess it was punishable by death from the state of Athens if you spoke about your experience in there or revealed any of the secrets. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess how would that shift, I guess, like religious thinking if we knew, say at the cradle of Western civilization, there were these psychedelic rites in ancient Greek culture. They used some sort of sacrament to induce visions and go into this temple and have this type of experience. Because it seemed like it really kind of got pushed under when Christianity started taking over, right? they had to hide that. And like most indigenous traditions, right? Like when the Spaniards came over to South America, and the people that were working with mushrooms and plant medicines, it was the work of the devil, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting, and I wonder like how some I didn't really grow up very religious, so I'm just even curious the people that did and may not understand this, indigenous kind of perspective of using plants to alter consciousness and have some sort of relationship with the universe. I wonder how that came off to them seeing this on CNN, that, hey, maybe there are psychedelic substances involved in some of these early mysteries and early kind of like religious sects. So
yeah, absolutely. So I'm just thankful that people are still talking about this. I personally believe it's the origin for a lot in our world. Like if you look at Chinese religion and mythology, you look at Hindu stuff, and even some really interesting stuff in Egypt and Africa more generally, like Gabon and like the Dogon tribes. Like there's some really interesting stuff out there, and it seems logical that plants and drugs would have played a big part.
The Dogon, that's really fascinating, right?
We never talked about that. I talked to the author of the book a while back for my old podcast. Forget his name. He was digging into the Dogon Mysteries for years. And it was super neat. Like I'm not aware of them using drugs, but their insights really make it look like they probably were.
Well, I mean, even just we could put drugs out of the picture, but as we talk about sometimes in class, is that there's so many different ways of working with non-ordinary states of consciousness or inducing a holotropic state of consciousness. And plant substances are one way, but some of these cultures had breathing techniques, drumming, dancing, and maybe they lived in a much more animistic worldview where, how are they interacting with the world at that time? And I mean, it's interesting from their perspective, right? So they have this dance in honor of Sirius, right? Sirius is the star. And the way that they dance is kind of in this way, it's like a double binary. And I mean, we just found out that Sirius is a double binary star. What was in the 60s or
not that
something
long
like
ago,
that?
yeah.
Pretty recently.
And they've been doing this for a few thousand years, probably.
Yeah. And it's like when you ask them, oh, how'd you know this? And then they give you an answer like, oh, well, the people from that star system told us or something like that. I forget what the story is. But, how do you believe in that? How do you buy into that when people tell you stuff like that? Oh, the plants told me this, or I had this experience where I interacted with this entity and they gave me all this information.
Mm. So the book is The Science of the Dogon from 2006. Laird Scranton was the author. Mm. And he lays out a pretty compelling case for visitation, or at least insight from elsewhere or otherwhere. I guess it's hard to phrase it, right? Like, but they've got downloads from these shamanic practices, and that's what it seems like, at least. The other super interesting part, Kyle, not too psychedelically oriented, but it almost looks like they were separated off from Egypt at a certain point. So it was almost like they were like a proto-Egyptian culture and kind of had like separate development tracks. So I thought that was the most interesting thing. I don't know if it was like the Kemet culture, like just kind of like pre-dynastic Egypt, or like early dynastic Egypt and they split off. But either way, super interesting. I would love to dig into more of that stuff.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
All right. Where do we want to go from here?
Yeah, I don't think there is much else about that one. But, I would definitely check out just that CNN clip if you want to check it out. We'll put it in the show notes. Or, like everybody recommended me to kind of just listen to that Joe Rogan podcast. But, Joe Rogan's so hard to listen to sometimes when it's like 3 hours. But yeah. And it sounded like, there was some updated information, but I guess Brian is really kind of pulling from a lot of these other scholars that started to put forward these hypotheses that, maybe it was an ergot mixture. And
maybe worth noting too, like this Eleusinian Mysteries thing is still somewhat of a hypothesis. We don't have great evidence for it. It just seems like this is what happened to a lot of us.
Right.
And we're kind of guessing in a lot of ways. So like anthropologists and historians of ancient Greece, like they don't hate the idea of this. I've talked to a few of them. They like it to a degree, but it's, is it in our world, Kyle, this is actually kind of an interesting question. Is it really that helpful to us if this is historically true?
Mm.
Or is it at least symbolically helpful for us? Like, does it need to be historically true for our movement to be valid? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. And I wonder too, like how much that plays, if it is our desire for it wanting to be true, how does it kind of play into the romanticizing about ancient cultures and their relationship to plants? I feel like that's like kind of all interconnected, right? It seems like we do kind of at times romanticize about indigenous traditions and their relationship to plants and consciousness and the way that they understood the world. And yeah, what is it about that is so intriguing to us at times? I know for myself, like looking at a lot of indigenous cultures or ancient traditions helped me kind of provide a framework for understanding some of these experiences that maybe Western traditions, like, they kind of have, but don't really have. And, maybe I found more comfort in these traditions, but to say like, they have all the answers because they were possibly doing some of this stuff, I think could get a little tricky at times. Like, why do we want to romanticize the past so much?
Right. It's a big deal, and we got to think about it. And, helpful is that we still have this division of holotropic states, drug, and then non-drug origination of them. So it's still there in our kind of Groff lineage because we've got the drug orientation plus breath work. And everything else, but really breath work. Yeah, I think it's a pretty cool situation. So, yeah, and Graham Hancock has had this kind of what is it called? Therianthrope? Some sort of concept of animal-human hybrids and therianthropes, I think. And they're on cave art, and he's kind of saying the origin for this is probably psychedelics on account of how often those visions come up on psychedelic states. Animal-human hybrids like a centaur and whatever else you'd see on cave drawings.
Right.
And that was a big thing for him in like 10 years ago or so. I think that was kind of his main thesis. I forget what book that was, maybe like Magicians of the Gods or something. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to Ann Arbor Poison Control Center. What did you learn there?
So, yeah, as we mentioned, and maybe many of you know, Ann Arbor made the decision to decriminalize psychedelic plant substances. So I just saw this today out of Wayne State University. The Poison Center warns of effects after Ann Arbor decriminalizes psychedelic substances. So they're really just kind of tossing out some warnings here about potential risks. And I just thought that was interesting. In part of their language, they were saying that, some psychedelics could lead to, possible death and, significant illness and hospitalization. And, I think they do raise a good point about this, especially if people may not be educating themselves about the potential danger. So, the two medicines that they were really highlighting, at first I was like, not much physical risk involved with psilocybin, but, things with ayahuasca, when you have a monoamine oxidase inhibitor involved, you're going to have to be careful with that. And so, I was just, at first I was like, oh, this is kind of like a funny little warning. Cause what we know about psychedelics is that they're relatively physically safe, but, them bringing up this, the ayahuasca with monoamine oxidase inhibitors, where you could run into potential issues if you're on certain medications, possible serotonin syndrome and stuff like that. So, and then they were also bringing up ibogaine too, which, we know that is kind of more on the dangerous side with heart and cardiovascular issues. So, is ibogaine decriminalized and, you're trying to do that, be sure you're playing it safe. That's all. I would probably recommend people doing that under some sort of supervision.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. It's just a really neat thing that a city is doing that now, especially in the wake of their big decriminalize win there. Yeah, it's just awesome to see. So I'm hoping other cities do that. I just wonder, like, how do first responders operate with data like that? Do they
Right.
look it up real time? Like, what did you eat? Okay, cool. No, this is how we respond. Or, is there a national database? Or, yeah, I imagine it doesn't make sense for a municipality to keep it just to themselves,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Anything more on that one?
Nope. Just interesting that they put out that. I mean, when I first came across that, I was like, oh, is this some sort of fear tactic, kind of pushing against it? But, they did have some good harm reduction and information, especially revolving around ayahuasca and ibogaine, just to be on the safer side. So, I'm glad they're being proactive and just putting stuff out there because, education's important, and being honest about the potential risks here is important, because I think a lot of people are starting to become more interested in this and may not really understand potential risks and benefits at all times. Maybe they just see the flashy headlines and go, oh, this is maybe something I want to do. And then maybe not really understanding what they're signing up for at times.
So a scary topic that we can just explore for a little bit here. Let's try to keep it as anonymous and location independent as we can. But this topic of misconduct in the psychedelic space has been coming up for me for a long time.
Yep.
Sexual misconduct, various kinds of abuse, non-sexual or otherwise. And how do we have accountability? And what should an organization like ours do when we get reports? So I last year was really close to, calling police and making public statements about one individual who's kind of chronically been abusing folks. Someone stopped me. So I didn't do that. I don't know what happened with that individual. And it's a really tough scene. I forget who said this, but one of the worst things you can be in the psychedelic space is a narc. So how do you balance ratting on somebody when they're regularly sexually abusing somebody or have a pattern of at least doing it once in a while? Sure, they might have helped 50 people. Great. But the 3 people they raped, wasn't very helpful for them. And how do we deal with that? In the therapy world with licenses and whatnot, you've got the police to go to. You're not doing illegal activity. You got a licensing board that kind of thumbs up, thumbs down them, and Yelp and shit too. You can actually go on and say, hey, had a really bad time with, Joe on September 12th, whatever. Perhaps you don't want to go see this person. This is what happened. And in the underground, we don't really have that. There's a lot of underground activity. There's also a fair amount of above ground stuff. Do you remember that study? I think it was earlier this year or late last year. Lots of therapists kind of self-reporting ethics violations, not in an anonymous fashion.
Okay.
So it was did you have an interpersonal thing that was not okay ethics-wise with a client in the last year or two? And a lot of people self-reported yes, even though it's anonymous.
It's pretty common.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as that power dynamic shifts, when there's drugs in the mix and you're more of a specialist, the power dynamics get really weird and people's sexuality gets triggered, defense mechanisms get triggered, and you're not kind of acting in 2 people meet at a restaurant kind of thing.
Right.
It's very different relationship. So I don't know, how does that get handled in the world of licensed therapy, Kyle? I'm sure you've seen at least a couple case studies.
Somebody would report that, it's to the state, right? And then there would be
to the license board.
Yeah. Or, maybe you could go to the police, but yeah, you could also report it to the license board, and just, let people know what happened. And then there would, probably be a hearing about it, and they would decide, whether or not to take your license away. And yeah, see if you could practice, right? Sometimes they pull that depending on the situations. But I remember, in my ethics class, kind of going through a lot of those case reports, and you'll actually be surprised how much of it was kind of sexual abuse at times, or just sexual relationships with clients. I feel like it does happen pretty often within the field. So, when you think about it, right? People are being very open and at times. And I guess if you're not dealing with some of that energy, like that transference, countertransference stuff, you could probably easily, get caught up in it, right? It's like, I've never told anybody that before. And then, you have all these feelings come up. So I think, it is common, but yeah, I think, the one thing that you mentioned is in the underground, how do you deal with that, right? You go to the cops and say, hey, listen, like this just happened to me. And I was also under the influence of an illegal substance. So are you going to get in trouble as well? And then just thinking about kind of like what the courts put you through also as a victim, right? I mean, that's sometimes traumatizing for people in general, just having to speak out against it and deal with the whole system too. So I don't know. Yeah, this is a conversation we've been having for a while, right? And trying to reach out to people to see what the best approach is. And I'm actually going to be on a panel coming up in January, I think, February, Psychedelic and Madness conference on this topic of sexual abuse and misconduct. So it's a big topic. And yeah, it definitely, I think, sits with both of us, right?
A lot.
When we hear this stuff, it's just like, what are we doing here, right? And I think something that comes up too, especially when you're dealing with organizations, you may hear this, don't fuck the movement up. Don't fuck it up for all of us. We're so close, right? And is that fair to say when there's really shitty things going on?
What kind of movement is it that covers this up? I think Dimitri Mijanis mentioned this to us. What kind of movement is it that would cover up rape to achieve its end and serious sexual misconduct? And victims have been told this, if you out this rape, this is bad for the movement. So please don't do it. It's are you fucking kidding me? No, absolutely not. If someone raped you, not okay. I don't know if you read this book, John Krakauer. He's a pretty big wilderness writer, adventure writer, kind of investigative journalist. He did a book called Missoula, subtitle Rape and the Justice System in a College Town. Apparently Missoula, Montana had a really bad track record, possibly one of the worst sexual assault campuses in the States. And really great book. And it talked about how many untested rape kits there are at the police station, how little firsthand testimony counts in rape cases, can you prove it kind of stuff, how regularly the police department won't even investigate. They're nah, didn't happen, sorry. Or someone's a football star and they kind of cover it up as a result of fame or the consequences of their actions. And it's just really ugly. And we saw this I know of one case in Boulder where I think the police actually raped somebody in our movement, and the whole situation was covered up really badly. It might not be exactly accurate, but there's just really, really nasty stuff that happens all over the place. And the accountability isn't even great when things are above board, especially with, college stuff, police. But I think in the therapy world, you'd probably have a better situation. In my sessions in Jamaica last summer, we had cameras because I didn't necessarily want to just trust that the client wouldn't have something to say about the session. So everything was on camera. I felt a little awkward about that, but it was for both of our security.
Safety, yeah.
Made me feel a lot safer. And therefore, I think they should have felt safer too.
Yeah.
And so there's no real accountability. And, sometimes rumors are that organizations are helping cover these things up too. I wasn't watching the Richard Jensen stuff too carefully. I should probably dig into what happened there. But some people are blaming MAPS for kind of letting Jensen go a little too long based on knowing things. I don't really know. Do you know much more about that? I kind of a little negligent for me to not know that story very well. But, Jensen, people should read that story, Richard Jensen.
Yeah, it's out there. If you just type in Richard Jensen MAPS, you'll be able to find it. And I think MAPS put out a statement. And I know right after that all happened, they did put together a little ethics page, I guess, So, I guess trying to do some of their due diligence there with that. But yeah, I don't know the full story. Like I've chatted with, various people kind of giving me bits and pieces of it, but I don't remember everything in detail. And, is some of the stuff that I heard also valid too, right? I feel like some of the stuff we hear is like, is this through the grapevine or is there actual truth here as well? So.
Right. So like, what's the most evolved way to handle this is like a really big question. Is it full on excommunication? Is it some sort of restorative justice situation? Is it something different that I don't know about? Hiring mediators?
Right.
Or is it best to just, do what seems to be popular in the movement and just release emails unconsensually to people's websites? It seems to be a really, really cool trend. Please don't release my personal emails, anybody. They're just that personal. And it's a complicated scenario, man. Like I don't feel great about where we're at, largely because of this lack of accountability. Like it's progress that we're seeing, but it's not necessarily enough. Especially on things that we're not waiting on the FDA to like get our ethics together. Ethics can happen right now.
Yeah, I'm even just trying to think about like another public situation that unfolded with Neil Goldsmith, right? And I felt like Horizons, made a public statement about that, about some of the stuff that happened. But I don't really know whatever happened, like with that whole thing, right? It felt like there was some stuff that was cooking. The Horizons removed him from being the MC. That he's been an MC, I think, since the beginning there.
Yeah.
Horizons set up a lot of the safe space kind of policies for their conferences moving forward. But yeah.
It's tough. Like I lean pretty heavily on the Mike Tyson story, on like why I don't want Mike Tyson really involved in the psychedelic movement, because number one, he is a convicted rapist, convicted, and imagine what he's gotten away with if he was convicted at one point. So
right,
I think that's a little ugly. I don't know the whole story there, but at least a court said he was guilty. I don't really have that kind of power in other cases unless there was a court case and a conclusion, especially on stuff that's this hot button.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's other things I'm loose with. Go ahead.
I remember in the past we talked about with a few different people to get some sort of like committee together. You remember that? We were talking about like some sort of like elder committee, and like, could there be a place that we could report these things, and then that organization could help support people that have been through these types of experiences?
I had 4 or 5 meetings with some people who are pretty active in the space about this and took notes, and like we had a whole project plan, but it really fell apart because, we're trying to live, right? Like I still don't have health insurance. Like last month, I wasn't sure I was going to make rent. So I'm like, okay, cool. This isn't great. How much charity work can I really do until my life is together?
Right.
And it's tough. It's a really hard bind. And others, they're working on other big projects. I'm sure they have enough money to live, but they're working on kind of pretty big startups. So how do we fund that as a community? It would be really great if there was some sort of, ethics group, like psychedelic watchdog group that was funded, and we had a few employees that could really just focus on ethics in the space. Perhaps like North Star Pledge as a starting point, but I think that's, probably going to look a little immature in a couple of years. Mm-hmm. So like you got to be really forward looking. So
yeah, and I guess like what would that look like, right? Like totally. I'm just even thinking about like the 5MEO world and that whole website that went up, kind of calling people out. And
it was 2 individuals who were like pretty well known to be ugly, but I didn't necessarily feel great about that. Like I felt at risk signing that.
Right.
Did it anyway.
But is that enough to like make people stay away from those people and to stop their work?
Not forever.
Yeah.
But I think Dr. Jerry did step down. He made some public statements, some goofy stuff on his Facebook page. I'm quitting this work and I'm going to go help the children now, something like that. I don't really know what that means. Perhaps go back to being a obstetrician, but probably makes too much money in the 5 space to really return to being a normal doctor.
Mm.
Yeah, and Octavio, I think Octavio's got enough bad press now where he's seeing less people, but it's really hard to say. But that felt really uncomfortable to me, like being involved in something that actually names people.
Right.
But their actions really spoke for themselves. And Octavio's stuff was on video. It's not like you can dispute it.
Yeah, there's YouTube video there using your little stun toy gun, and yeah. Some of those videos are disturbing.
People getting water in their lungs because like your autonomic nervous system is getting suppressed and gag reflex isn't working appropriately, and it's like not okay. I think that puts people in tremendous risk. Lung is prone to infection, not to mention suffocation, drowning, and whatnot, too. And not to mention the trauma that could happen from that. Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot here. I think we're going to keep thinking about this topic for a while.
We have been.
Yeah.
Since we started this project, it keeps evolving. And I don't know. I'd be interested if anybody has any ideas. Feel free to shoot them over to us.
I know Mike Margulies is like kind of spearheading a small project on this. I contributed a little bit like the last week or two. So, people are working on it. It's just, if we don't fund projects, it kind of means that the projects might not get the attention they deserve.
Right.
So like how much attention does this deserve? I think a lot. I think it's really incumbent on a lot of us to have this all squared away. The groups with the most money, groups like Field Trip Compass, MindMed, I don't know that they would be interested, but maybe they don't really have ties with the underground as far as I can tell.
Right.
So perhaps they're like, oh, not our problem. We're all legal. So good luck, everybody.
Just, I guess, the one benefit of legalization, right? Brings everything above board.
Yeah. Consumer safety, reporting, competition, who's got the best quality LSD for the least money, yeah, of course I'll pay $3 or $20 for pure LSD. Like, of course I would. So, yeah, it rules out a big portion. I just recorded with this lawyer yesterday, Gary Michael Smith, Esquire. I don't even know if I showed you this yet, but that's the wrong one. Psychedelics. It's a really big kind of like legal resource book, kind of running through all case precedents and like definitions and histories that are relevant to making cases around religions and legalization, decriminalization, all that. He was like at the end, this is my biggest point of contention with him. He said he likes the DEA at the end. And I was like, oh God, fighting words. Let me put on my gloves. And, it started, we handled it well. I was like, oh, it's interesting you say that. I really disagree with the DEA and think
what was his argument for that?
Consumer safety. He started kind of going off on labs being dirty and people getting a lot of adulterants, which some labs are dirty. Some people are getting adulterants. I don't know what percentage is, that's true about,
Mostly, I guess like, wouldn't FDA have kind of say over that stuff?
That's more
consumer, consumer
I'm
products?
more into the consumer protection, like through,
right.
Clean good manufacturer, like in the FDA. Like if you're making a supplement or whatever it is, I imagine these would go through like supplement law if we got them legalized. Like same way you buy Advil, vitamin E, and LSD, like same mechanisms.
Yeah.
And maybe there could be third-party validation like USP or something. Like, cool. Yes, this batch tested good. This batch tested good. Go on through. CBD is handling it pretty well with independent third-party labs publishing their results. So like we could do it. Yeah. With DEA, I just think like asset forfeiture, civil seizure, and like perpetuation of the drug war. An interesting thing is like, how are these groups incentivized? Are they incentivized to just keep doing busts and like locking up low-level offenders? Like I think some people are, like certain DAs, like their budget is based on convictions, and the more convictions, the more budget, the more the raises. So it's like they're not really. They could be ethically convinced, I think, but financially, I don't think the DA would see much financial benefit in decriminalization or legalization.
Yeah.
And, when I say that, I mean everything. I don't mean just plants. Other people mean just plants.
There's a interesting article. Maybe we'll get to it next week. Joe and I didn't have time to dig into it, but it was like how the DEA is interfering with religious use of psychedelics. So I'm curious to dig into this just on the topic of the DEA.
All right. Well, I know you've got to run in 3 or 4 minutes here, but just everybody keep in mind this sexual abuse and just abuse in general topic is top of mind for us. We're actively trying to figure out how to address it. We want to do it in the most civil way possible. So, but we don't know what that is yet. We're still trying to figure that out. Like, we don't want to throw anybody under the bus that shouldn't be, but there are folks out there that I think shouldn't necessarily be facilitating or teaching or really even too involved in the space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
do you want to, please send us any thoughts that you guys might have about all this. I think it's important to just have the conversation, air it, and just, get it out there and just, keep letting it be known that it is still happening. But did you want to touch base on this bipolar magic mushroom study? Just letting people know that this is...
Can't believe I forgot that.
Yeah.
So a while back, Michelle Janikian wrote an article for us exploring this idea of bipolar and psychedelics. It seems like other people were thinking similar things. And Michelle kind of found some of those people for the article. But it looks like a team of people at UCSF are putting together a study. And they're actually taking survey participants now to look at psilocybin and bipolar disorder. I don't know if you saw this, Kyle, but I abbreviated it BPD by accident, and a lot of people corrected me. So I updated a lot of the posts with bipolar, and no, it's no longer borderline. So that's corrected, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes if you want to at least look at what we've got. Check out that article in our show notes and contribute if you feel up for it. It's a really cool pioneering study.
So are they just asking people to just do a survey study that they're diagnosed?
It looks like
with
it's a survey-based research.
Cool.
Yeah. So if you're diagnosed with any kind of bipolar,
cool.
Check it out.
You use psychedelics or magic mushrooms.
Psilocybin specifically, yeah.
Cool.
Probably synthetic or mushroom oriented, but who has access to synthetic really? Just a few of you lucky souls.
Or the blue goo.
I want to learn how to make that. If anybody knows how to make it, let me know. I've got a guy around here, but he wants to really keep it secret. All right. Well, I think that's good for now. So check out that survey if you want to contribute to science. I don't know if I told you this, Kyle, but like Molly, who's one of the research folks and one of our students in class, she mentioned that the whole team did read the article that we put together and communicated with Michelle and a number of the people that contributed. So it's really awesome.
Sweet. It's really exciting. Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Molly. And thanks for the team at UCSF putting this together and going at it. It's important work. We've got to really figure out where the lines are. Like this whole bipolar schizophrenia topic is just, we don't really touch it because it's dangerous. So people need to look at it, and survey stuff is a great way to start. Yeah. All right. Well, if you want to help us out, leave us a review on Facebook, iTunes, your podcast app, wherever, Google. And I think that's it for now. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. Thank you, Joe. And we'll catch you next week.
See you on Tuesday, everybody. Bye-bye.